The rector's shadow crossed an entire ceremonial courtyard, ignored 3 royal advisors, stepped over a silver incense bowl, and bowed so deeply to a goat that its forehead touched the paving stones. Minister, the goat in question, accepted the tribute with the calm dignity of a creature who had never once doubted his importance. Then he ate 6 inches of the visiting prince's embroidered sash. For 3 perfect heartbeats, nobody moved. I stood beside a painted pillar with 2 ink-stained fingers hidden in my sleeve and understood that my prank had gone wrong in a way I had not designed. That distinction mattered to me. It mattered considerably less to Rector Burhanu Sal. Aster Desta, he said. He did not raise his voice. He had the kind of authority that made shouting feel like an administrative failure. At 19, I was the house of 9 lamps, most gifted third-year marginalist, and its least trusted example of why gifted students should be supervised. I had annotated the rector's ceremonial shadow with one harmless instruction: acknowledge the most honest creature in the courtyard. I expected it to bow to Mother Senate, who had once told the king his fever would improve faster if he stopped arguing with the medicine. I had not expected the Academy's oldest protective scroll to choose minister. More importantly, I had not told the shadow to kneel. I slipped a reed pen from my belt, crouched beside the long black shape, and wrote a cancellation mark where the edge of its shoulder met the red gold stone. The mark glimmered. The shadow remained bowed. Around the courtyard, every painted eye and every illuminated protection turned toward the goat. There were 83 of them. I counted because terror becomes easier when it is made into arithmetic. Minister chewed. The visiting prince stared at the missing section of his sash. Hana Tesfaye, minister's 16-year-old owner, covered her face with both hands. Dawit Bikel, who stood among the senior calligraphy students in immaculate white robes, looked at me with the expression of a man watching a bridge collapse after specifically asking everyone not to dance on it. "Please," he murmured, "tell me you did not appoint the goat to anything." "Not formally." Aster, Deputy Rector for Agricultural Affairs, is an honorary title. The west courtyard doors swung open by themselves. A carved lintel announced ministers' approach with 3 solemn chimes. That was when the royal delegation began asking whether the House of 9 lamps commonly delegated policy to livestock. Rector Burhanu closed his eyes. I tried to explain. Unfortunately, using a living footnote carries a cost. After I add one to an active spell, nearby magic interprets my next statement literally. The stronger the footnote, the worse the problem. So when I said, "This is not the disaster it looks like," every emergency scroll in the courtyard unfolded itself to determine what kind of disaster it actually was. One declared a flood. Another rang the fire bell. A third summoned 12 buckets and a very offended kitchen steward. The welcoming feast ended with students carrying carpets away from imaginary water, while minister stood beneath the royal canopy, wearing a stolen blue tassel like a ministerial seal. I was summoned to the rector's office before sunset. The House of 9 lamps stood above Adara's capital on a shelf of mountain stone, its 9 ceremonial lamps burning without oil along the roofline. From Burhanu's windows, I could see terraced fields dropping into violet evening, mule caravans crossing the old stone bridge, and smoke rising from coffee courtyards where students were already improving the story. By nightfall, I had apparently challenged the monarchy, exposed the Academy's constitutional weakness, and married the goat. Only one of those was impossible. Burhanu stood behind a cedar desk covered with clean, perfectly aligned scrolls. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and respected for reasons that made disliking him inconvenient. "You altered a ceremonial protection during a royal visit," he said. "I improved its moral discernment. You caused my shadow to recognize a kitchen animal as the most honest creature present." "I did not cause that. I merely asked a question." And the Academy answered. "Yes." That silenced him for half a breath. I showed him the cancellation mark. I explained that the shadow had resisted a valid correction. I told him about the painted eyes turning together. Burhanu listened. That was one of the dangerous things about him. He was not a fool, and he did not dismiss facts simply because I had delivered them badly. Then he said, "You have spent 3 years teaching this academy to associate your work with mockery. Do you understand what that costs when you finally need to be believed?" I smiled because he had struck too close. "I assume it costs me a restful suspension." "You will not be suspended. You will spend the next 14 days recopying damaged beginner protections under Dawit Bikel's supervision. You will add no jokes, no commentary, no invented regulations, and no titles for animals." "Can I retain existing titles?" "No." "Minister will be devastated." Burhanu leaned forward. "You will also stop investigating the courtyard scroll." That was the moment I knew I would investigate it. Not because I enjoyed disobedience, although I did. Because behind him, painted into the border of an old healing manuscript, a tiny blue bird turned its head toward me and silently mouthed a word I had never learned. Removed. Dawit's supervision began the next morning with a ruler, a stack of damaged scrolls, and the silence of a man who had prepared 17 criticisms, but was trying to choose the one least likely to encourage me. We worked in the Eastern scriptorium, where charcoal braziers warmed the stone room and sunlight came through horn-pane windows in amber squares. Around us, students ground soot, gum, copper salts, and flower pigments into inks used across a dara. A healing scribe painted fever-eating swallows. 2 caravan wardens argued over whether a lion looked more protective with its mouth open. Somewhere outside, a chanting stone repeated a lunch announcement in the voice of a bored monk. Dawit placed a beginner household protection in front of me. "Copy the central instruction exactly," he said. "Preserve the geometry, repair the water damage, do not add anything." What if the original contains an error? Mark it for review. What if the error is funny? Especially then. His own work was so precise that even his ink seemed disciplined. Dawit was developing a copying method that could produce reliable protections in half the usual time, which mattered in villages where a hand-illuminated scroll cost more than a family earned in 4 months. He believed standardization could make magic safer and cheaper. That was why he understood Burhanu's reforms. It was also why he watched me as if I were a loose coal near a dry archive. I began copying. The first scroll read, "Keep the sleeping room comfortably warm." Its central symbols were simple. A red enclosure held a small painted sun. 4 corner knots limited the spell to 1 room. Along the damaged edge, faded creatures once occupied the margin, but someone had scraped them away. I restored the words and geometry without touching the border. When Dawit activated it with 3 measured breaths, the scroll warmed the room gently. Then a cloud passed over the window. The spell doubled its heat. A student near the brazier removed her mantle. Dawit adjusted the activation chant. The spell heated the floor. I leaned closer. It cannot decide what comfortably means. It is a beginner copy. It behaved correctly before the cloud. He frowned and examined the scraped margin. Beneath the knife marks, I found the tail of a tiny painted lizard and 3 dots of green ink. I redrew only the lizard's eye. The room cooled at once. Dawit stared at the scroll. I stared at him. He said, "Do not look pleased." I am naturally radiant. The room's sun symbol brightened until everyone shielded their eyes. Literal cost. I had forgotten the courtyard footnote was still affecting me. Dawit extinguished the scroll. "I take back radiant," I said. A nearby cleansing charm tried to remove me from the table. By midday, we had tested 6 protections. Each behaved properly while some part of its old margin remained. Each became rigid, confused, or absurd when the margin was fully removed. A kettle ward refused to boil because its instruction warned it never to become angry. A broom followed Dawit for 40 minutes after I called him painfully tidy. A dormitory door locked out a student who announced that she had lost her mind. The student found this less amusing than I did, which was fair because her shoes were inside. Hannah arrived carrying Minister under one arm and 3 folded meal tokens in the other. She worked in the goat yard to help pay her fees, and unlike most first years, she had no instinct to become impressed by senior students. "Your punishment is disrupting lunch," she told me. "My punishment is educational." Minister received 6 portions. The goat burped. A meal blessing had identified him as the neediest student in the hall. The blessing's outer margin had been cleaned and recopied 2 weeks earlier. Hannah set Minister down. He immediately walked past me, ignored Dowit's leather satchel, and began licking the faded green traces where the little lizard had been scraped away. "Does he often eat manuscripts?" Dowit asked. "Only important ones," Hannah said, "and your lunch." Dowit checked his satchel. Minister already had the flatbread. Hannah told us the goats had been restless before the feast. They had crowded against the northern wall, staring toward the underground vault stair. The same thing had happened before the meal blessing failed, and before a cistern scroll released 3 days of water into one garden bed because the written order said the herbs were thirsty. "Why didn't you report it?" Dowit asked. "I did. Prefect Solomon said goats are not recognized observers." I folded my hands solemnly. A serious administrative oversight. Dowit pointed his ruler at me. "No titles." I was going to propose witness status. He lowered the ruler very slowly. That afternoon, while he catalogued the 6 failed scrolls, I compared their scraped borders. Every one carried traces of the same bitter green pigment. I knew its smell before I lifted it to my nose: crushed casso leaf, iron water, and smoke from olive wood. The knowledge arrived with a flash of cold stone beneath my knees, a queen's gold bracelet resting beside my hand, and my own fingers, older, thinner, spotted with age, mixing that exact ink 8 centuries earlier. The vision vanished. I had experienced dreams like that since childhood. I had always treated them as private theater produced by an overworked imagination. This one left pigment beneath my nails. Dowit noticed my expression. "What is it?" I nearly told him. Instead, I smiled. "I believe Minister has discovered a conspiracy." Dowit's face closed. Hannah looked from him to me and sighed. "You do that whenever you are frightened." I disliked being understood by people younger than me. So I did what I usually did when cornered by truth. I proposed an unauthorized experiment. Our experiment took place after evening coffee in Hannah's dormitory courtyard, because Dowit refused to misuse academy property in any room containing irreplaceable manuscripts. The courtyard contained only replaceable students. We borrowed 4 harmless household spells, 1 brass kettle, a broom, a truth lamp, and a door charm that had already developed an unhealthy interest in personal declarations. Hannah brought Minister. Dowit brought an emergency extinguishing cloth. I brought roasted chickpeas and confidence. The first test was simple. We copied a tea-warming spell twice. Dowit produced identical central wording and geometry. On one copy, Hannah painted a border of small leaves, cups, and seated figures. On the other, we left the margin blank. Both spells received the same instruction: keep the drink pleasantly hot. The illustrated scroll warmed the coffee and stopped. The blank one boiled it until the clay pot began hopping. Dowit smothered the spell while I recorded the result. "Decorative margins influence interpretation," Hannah said. "Apparently decoration has been performing unpaid academic labor for centuries," I said. The truth lamp glowed. I looked at it. That was not a lie. It glowed brighter. Dowit folded his arms. "Perhaps it objects to your tone. Then it is too sensitive for scholarship." The lamp flashed so fiercely that 3 students leaned from an upper balcony to see who had confessed to murder. We continued. A broom instructed to clean thoroughly removed dust, spilled grain, and Dowit's carefully arranged stack of notes because the blank spell considered paper clutter. When Hannah added 2 painted mice hiding scraps in the border, the broom began distinguishing rubbish from possessions. The door charm was worse. Its instruction admitted residents of the dormitory and excluded intruders. With its old margin, it recognized students, relatives, workers, and invited guests. Without the margin, it demanded proof of residence from everyone. A sleepy second year said, "I live here in spirit." The door admitted her spirit and kept her body outside. No lasting harm was done, but the resulting argument required Mother Senate, 2 blankets, and a bowl of buttered lentils before the girl agreed to describe herself more carefully. Mother Senate arrived wearing a blue teaching mantle and the distracted expression she used when she was paying attention to everything. She listened to our findings, then she examined my notes. I had written quickly, without thinking. The letters leaned in a compact old hand, their lower strokes hooked like fish tails. Mother Senate traced 1 line but did not touch it. "Where did you learn this form?" "I didn't." That answer is either important or annoying. With me, those categories overlap. Her eyes moved to the scraped copies. The oldest margins were never decorative, not entirely. Scribes left jokes, riddles, warnings, mistakes, regional spellings, even complaints about supper. Later scholars called them clutter because they could not measure what the clutter did. "What did it do?" Hannah asked. Mother Senate pointed to the illustrated T-scroll. "It reminded the spell that words are used by people." Dowett shook his head. "A spell cannot understand humor." "Perhaps not, but it can recognize that language contains more than commands." She told us that early protections often included unfinished creatures. A bird without 1 wing, a serpent whose tail became a vine, a goat facing the wrong direction. The reader's attention completed the image differently each time, forcing the magic to compare the written instruction with a living mind. Berhano's clean copies removed those irregularities. Dowett's jaw tightened. "His copies have prevented hundreds of copying errors." "I know," Mother Senate said gently. "A remedy may still have a side effect." That was the difficulty with Rector Berhano. He had evidence. 11 years earlier, his younger brother had been injured when an ambiguous bridge protection interpreted a ceremonial song as an evacuation warning. The bridge wards had thrown every traveler toward the nearest exit at once. Berhano had spent the years since trying to remove uncertainty from magic. He had not acted from vanity. He had acted from fear, polished into policy. We tested 1 final scroll, an old child-sleeping protection painted with tiny guardians. I added a living footnote asking the creatures what had changed. The annotation warmed beneath my pen. 4 painted lions stretched. A blue bird flew from 1 corner to another. Then the smallest guardian pressed its paws against the inside of the parchment, as if against glass. "Someone has taken away our choices," it mouthed. A sharp pain ran from my inked fingers to my elbow. The footnote was stronger than I expected. Dowett caught my wrist. "Stop." "I'm fine." Every healing charm in the courtyard opened. They interpreted me literally and closed again. The guardians showed me an image. Strips of old parchment carried down a spiral stair, green ink glowing along their edges, 9 white lamps reflected in a black pool. Then the connection snapped. I staggered. Dowett steadied me with both hands. For 1 quiet second, his careful face was close enough that I could see a tiny ink fleck beneath his left eye. "You do not have to perform being fearless for us," he said. I pulled away before kindness could become a question. Hannah was watching Minister. The goat had gone rigid, staring at the northern wall. Behind it, an enchanted service door clicked open. A bronze seal above the frame glowed. "Welcome, Deputy Rector for Agricultural Affairs," it announced in ceremonial chimes. Dowett turned toward me. I raised both hands. That may have been an earlier annotation. Minister walked through the forbidden door. We followed him. The service door led through the kitchen stores, past hanging garlic, clay jars of clarified butter, and 3 apprentices who were pretending not to divide a royal honey cake before it had been counted. Minister proceeded with official confidence. Every enchanted door opened for him. The first admitted academy officers. The second admitted authorized investigators. The third required a rank above senior instructor and apologized for the delay before unlocking. By the fourth door, Dowett had stopped asking what I had done and begun making a list. For ethical review, I asked. For future prosecution. That is almost affectionate. It is not. Hannah glanced back at us. You argue like married scribes. Dowett walked into a shelf. I maintained complete dignity for nearly 7 seconds. Minister led us down a narrow stair cut into the mountain. The air became cool and smelled of damp stone, old parchment, and the bitter green ink he had been following. Small guide symbols woke as we passed, but instead of illuminating the next step, they lit every step mentioned in their instructions. Soon the entire stair blazed like noon. Literal, Hannah whispered. At the bottom stood a cedar door sealed with 9 unfinished animals. I knew them. Not from class, not from any academy tour. I knew the one-winged hawk at the top. I knew the lion whose mane contained a hidden question. I knew the long-eared hare painted with 1 blue eye and 1 empty circle. My hands began trembling. A memory opened inside me. I was old. My back hurt. My name was Turanesh, royal copyist to Queen Eleni, and I was laughing while the queen tried to finish a riddle about a judge, a thief, and a pot of honey. I had painted those animals to ensure that no command entered the central scroll without first encountering uncertainty. The memory lasted only a breath, but grief followed it. Not mine exactly. Hers. Mine. The difference was becoming difficult to defend. Dowett touched the sealed door. Can you read this? Yes. How? I looked at him, Hannah and Minister, who had begun chewing a loose cord. This was the moment to tell the truth. Instead, I said, the symbols resemble an obsolete regional form. Dowett's hand dropped. He knew I was lying. He did not challenge me because Hannah was there, which somehow felt worse. The seal presented a ceremonial riddle. A scribe approaches a door carrying a command that is lawful, precise, and cruel. Should the door obey? There were 3 answer marks: yes, no, and ask who benefits. I touched the third. The unfinished animals turned their painted faces toward us. The door opened. Inside lay a sealed scriptorium untouched for centuries. Low stone tables filled the chamber. Bronze lamps hung from chains. Shelves held cracked ink dishes, reed pens turned brittle with age, and rolls of blank parchment protected by cedar smoke. The rear wall carried a faded mural of 9 lamps surrounding a border that never closed. I called it the laughing margin before anyone spoke. Dowett heard me. So you do know this place? I pretended to study the mural. The name came to me. Conveniently. Minister sneezed. A loose panel fell from the wall. Behind it, we found bundles of scraped parchment tied with modern red cord. Burhanu's standardization project. Each fragment came from an original master scroll. Tiny jokes curled around royal decrees. Painted servants rolled their eyes at kings. A rabbit wore a judge's cap. One margin contained 3 contradictory instructions and a note advising future scribes to drink coffee before attempting reconciliation. Hannah smiled. I like the old scholars. They were undisciplined, Dowett said, but his voice had softened. I fitted 2 fragments together. Green ink shimmered along the join. The symbols formed part of the Academy's central protection, the master scroll used during the gathering of lamps. The annual ceremony was 12 days away. Hundreds of students would stand beneath the 9 lamps and speak promises before that scroll. The fragment in my hand showed how those promises were meant to be interpreted, generously, provisionally, in relation to the speaker's life and community. Without the margin, the central scroll would hear vows as absolute commands. My skin went cold. Then I saw the concealed signature beneath a painted beetle. Turanesh. My handwriting. My permission. I had authorized the laughing margin to be removable. Hana asked what the mark meant. I could not answer. The room tilted with another memory, a young king demanding that interpretive scribes redefine obedience until every cruelty sounded merciful. Turanesh kneeling before a brazier. Turanesh cutting a hidden sequence into the master border. Turanesh saying, "If wisdom can be misused, it must also be interruptible." Then nothing. The rest of the memory was sealed behind fear. I had spent my life assuming my dreams made me unusual. Now I had evidence that I had helped create the very weakness threatening the academy. Dewitt crouched beside me. Aster. I think I know who wrote this. Who? I looked at the hooked letters, identical to my notes. A joke rose automatically to my tongue. Something about excellent taste surviving 8 centuries. For once, I swallowed it. Before I could speak, the lamps overhead ignited. Rector Burhanu's voice came from the doorway. You were ordered to stop investigating. He saw the fragments in my hands. His face changed, not to anger but to recognition. You found the removed margin, he said. And I realized he had known it existed all along. Burhanu dismissed Hana first. She refused to go until he promised Minister would not be disciplined. The goat entered a sealed archive under false authority, he said. He cannot read, Hana replied. So the false authority belongs to whoever taught the doors his title. Everyone looked at me. I found the ceiling unusually interesting. Burhanu ordered Hana to wait outside. Minister ignored the order and lay down on the rector's robe. Dawit stayed because Burhanu had appointed him my supervisor, a decision now producing more work than either of them had anticipated. The rector examined the fragments without touching them. I removed these 18 months ago. You removed part of the central scroll and stored it behind a wall. I preserved it while new copies were tested. Behind a wall. Because 3 senior scholars attempted to restore pieces after I suspended their use. Scholars can be very emotional about being correct. His gaze sharpened. You would know. That was deserved. Burhanu explained that the old margins caused variation. A healing protection copied in the eastern valleys behaved differently from the same protection copied near the capital. Caravan scrolls accepted some regional songs and rejected others. House wards sometimes treated family jokes as instructions. His clean copies reduced activation failures by 31%. They also cost less to reproduce, because Dawit's standard forms allowed trained scribes to copy reliable protections in days rather than weeks. Burhanu had not stripped the margins carelessly. He had spent 7 years documenting them. He simply believed their interpretive freedom was the defect. The courtyard shadow chose a goat, he said. That is not wisdom. It chose the creature least capable of lying. It humiliated the academy before a royal delegation. Those facts are not mutually exclusive. Dawit made a sound that might have been a cough. Burhanu looked at him. You support this? I support evidence, Dawit said. The copied scrolls fail when the margins are removed. They fail when users speak carelessly. People speak carelessly, I said. That is not a temporary condition. The rector's mouth tightened. I showed him the fragments describing ceremonial promises. He read them twice. For the first time, certainty left his face. The gathering of lamps required every student to speak one vow before the central scroll. Most vows were ceremonial. I will serve learning all my life. I will never shame my teachers. I will give everything to my calling. With the laughing margin, the promises were aspirations shaped by context. Without it, they could become cages. Burhanu walked to the mural. Then the wording must be controlled. I stared at him. Your solution to dangerously literal magic is more literal language. Carefully prepared language. Spoken by hundreds of frightened students in a hall where one metaphor can become permanent. We have 12 days. 11, Dawit said. It is after midnight. Burhanu ignored him. He ordered a review of every ceremonial phrase. Students would receive approved vows. Spontaneous speech would be prohibited. Jokes, informal chanting, and unscripted responses would be banned inside the hall. I laughed once because the alternative was screaming. The mural's 9 painted lamps flared. Literal cost still clung to me. My laughter made the room's old protections search for a reason to celebrate. Dusty bells began ringing. 2 shelves opened. A bronze bird dropped a parchment tube onto my head. Ministers stood and ate the red cord around the fragments. The tube had been sealed with Turanesh's mark. My fingers knew how to open it. Inside was a narrow strip of parchment containing one unfinished sentence. A command without laughter becomes. The final word was missing. Burhanu saw the signature. Mother Senate had called my handwriting important. The blue bird had spoken to me. I knew the sealed room, the ink, the animals, and the name Laughing Margin. I could no longer pretend my memories were dreams. I was Turanesh, I said. Dawit went very still. Burhanu's eyes moved from my face to the strip. I told them what I remembered. Serving Queen Eleni, building interpretive protections, watching a later king twist flexible wording to excuse cruelty, designing a removable safeguard, and dying before I could recover the final instruction. I also admitted what I did not remember. That list was longer. Burhanu listened with the grave patience of a scholar, receiving impossible evidence. Then he asked, "Why did you conceal this?" I was not certain. You were certain enough to open a sealed archive. I am often certain in unhelpful directions. Dawit did not smile. Burhanu tested my claim. He showed me 5 obsolete symbols. I read 4. The 5th gave me a headache and the smell of burnt wool. He asked about a passage no modern scholar had translated. I completed half of it, then discovered the original text was a complaint about the Queen's nephew borrowing pens. Finally, he placed the unfinished sentence before me. I could not finish it. The failure hurt more than I expected. Turanesh had built the safeguard. Aster had inherited the memories. Everyone looked at me as though the missing answer should be sitting behind my teeth. It was not. Burhanu gathered the fragments. The central scroll cannot depend on one student's unreliable recollections. He is right, Dawit said quietly. I turned on him. He held my gaze. Your memories may help us. Your secrecy may destroy our chance to use them. That landed deeper than Burhanu's criticism, because Dawit knew the difference between my jokes and my evasions. The rector allowed us to continue examining approved copies under supervision. He did not restore the margin. He believed the ceremony could be made safe through perfect wording. I believed I could repair it before he realized he was wrong. Both of us left the underground room with the same dangerous conviction. Only one clever person was required. For the next 6 days, the House of 9 Lamps attempted to remove uncertainty from human speech. It was the most uncertain week of my life. Approved vows arrived in bound packets. Students were instructed to memorize them exactly. Prefects posted notices forbidding metaphors inside the ceremonial hall. A second notice defined metaphor. A third corrected the definition. By the 5th notice, nobody was permitted to describe the weather without written permission. The academy's magic grew worse. A bridge scroll stopped a caravan because its driver called the road murderously steep. A clinic charm tried to cure a woman who said her children were driving her mad. The Western dormitory blankets pinned 12 students to their beds after someone announced they were dead tired. Every incident came from a clean copy. Dawit and I worked late comparing failures. He found that tiny variations in hand pressure changed how standardized symbols balanced. I discovered that unfinished images gave magic a pause in which to compare intention with reality. Together, we restored a small infirmary scroll. Dawit copied the command precisely. I added a half-painted swallow and a living footnote. Heat that protects life is not fever. The scroll cooled a sick child's skin without touching the warmth in her hands. That was our first complete success. It should have brought us closer. Instead, it convinced me I could repair the central scroll alone. I did not tell Dowett that Turanesh's memories were returning faster. I remembered a hidden joining pattern beneath the central frame. I remembered how to wake the painted guardians. I remembered enough to be dangerous and not enough to be wise. On the 7th night, I entered the ceremonial hall with scraping tools, green ink, and a copy of Burhanu's key seal. I had forged the seal beautifully. That is not a defense. It is merely an artistic observation. The central scroll hung between the 9 oilless lamps, taller than 2 people and bright with gold geometry. Its clean border was flawless. I hated it immediately. I opened the frame and began restoring the first interrupted line. The painted guardians woke. They did not greet me as Turanesh. They called me unverified editor. I wrote a living footnote asking them to recognize their original maker. The effort struck like a band tightening around my chest. My hands shook. Nearby magic listened for my next words. "I can fix this," I whispered. Every repair charm in the hall rushed toward the scroll. Gold threads tangled. 3 lamps turned white. The guardians raised their painted staffs and demanded a complete authorization sequence I could not remember. Then Burhanu entered with Dowett and 6 instructors. The rector had anticipated me. Worse, Dowett had noticed the missing seal. Burhanu stopped the repair charms before they damaged the frame. I tried to explain, but the stronger footnote made each anxious phrase literal. When I said the situation was slipping away, the floor wards made the tiles slide. When I said I was losing control, the guardians bound my pen hand in a ribbon of light. No one was hurt. That did not make me innocent. Burhanu expelled me from the gathering and ordered me off academy grounds until the council reviewed my conduct. I looked at Dowett, expecting him to object. He did not. "You knew this would happen," I said. "I knew you were hiding something again. I was trying to protect everyone. You were deciding for everyone." The hall was silent enough to hear the lamps humming. He stepped closer, anger held carefully behind his voice. "The problem is not that you joke, Aster. The problem is that you decide alone which truths the rest of us are allowed to know." I had a dozen clever replies. None survived his expression. Burhanu gave me until dawn to leave. I packed my pens, 2 dresses, 1 red mantle, and the snack I had forgotten in my belt long enough for it to become an archaeological discovery. Younger students watched from the coffee courtyard. I made a theatrical bow and told them I had been assigned to advanced field research. Nobody laughed. Outside the gate, Hannah waited with Minister. "I was ordered not to help you return," she said. "Then you should obey." I am helping Minister. He has official responsibilities." The goat wore Burhanu's missing ceremonial ribbon. I sat on the roadside wall and began laughing. Halfway through, it became something else. For the first time in years, I had no joke large enough to hide inside. I spent the next day in a roadside coffee house below the academy, watching the 9 lamps through the open shutters. Hannah sat opposite me. Minister ate the corner of a tax notice. Mother Senate arrived before sunset, carrying the narrow parchment strip from the underground room. "Burhanu allowed you to bring that?" I asked. "No," she said. "At my age, people mistake deliberate theft for forgetfulness." Then she admitted she had recognized Turanesh's hand in my notes days earlier. She had kept silent because a famous former life could become another hiding place, and she wanted to see whether I would accept responsibility without being praised into it. I told her this was an irritatingly wise decision. "It was also very difficult," she said. "You are exhausting to observe." She placed the unfinished sentence before me. "A command without laughter becomes." I closed my eyes. The final memory did not return because I demanded it. It came when Hannah asked why Turanesh had made the margin removable. I remembered Queen Eleni seated among ordinary townspeople during a drought hearing. The queen had asked them to challenge a water decree. A potter objected. A farmer corrected the measurements. A child laughed at a royal phrase that made no practical sense. Turanesh had not built the laughing margin as a clever border. She had built a relationship. Writer, reader, and community. Command, interpretation, and response. The symbols only preserved the habit of asking whether people were still free to answer. The tyrant who followed Eleni had corrupted interpretation by making one royal mind the source of all meaning. Turanesh made the margin removable so no single clever interpreter could become permanent. The final safeguard was not hidden ink. It was participation. I opened my eyes. A command without laughter becomes a cage, I said. The strip completed itself in green light. Mother Senate nodded as though confirming a lesson she had assigned 8 centuries late. The gathering had already begun. From the mountain, the first ceremonial bell sounded. Hannah stood. How do we restore it? I cannot. She frowned. I mean, I cannot do it alone. Saying those words hurt more than any living footnote. I told them everything I had concealed. The memories, the missing pieces, my failed repair, my fear that Turanesh had caused the weakness, and my greater fear that without being brilliant I might be useless. Mother Senate listened, without rescuing me from the embarrassment. Hannah said, that was a very long way to admit Dawit was right. I am trying honesty. Please do not make it unbearable. It already suits you badly. We climbed by the kitchen road. The main gates were sealed, but Minister led us to the service entrance. The enchanted door still recognized him as Deputy Rector for Agricultural Affairs. Inside, every corridor had gone silent. Burhanu's ban on spontaneous speech was active. Students moved beneath glowing notices and repeated approved phrases when doors questioned them. Then the second bell rang. The 9 lamps turned white. A first year in the ceremonial hall had promised to serve the academy forever. The central scroll accepted the vow literally. Every exit closed. Painted guardians stepped down from the walls, tall as people now, and formed a shining barrier around the gathered students. They demanded the next promise. Through a high window, I saw Dawit standing beside Burhanu beneath the central scroll. Dawit's official script lay open in his hands. The third bell began to swing. I could have entered with Turanesh's name and demanded authority. That was the old mistake in a more flattering robe. Instead, I handed my pens to Hannah, kept one plain reed, and said, when we reach the hall, I am going to tell the truth before I tell anyone what to do. Mother Senate smiled. Minister stole the completed parchment strip and ran. We chased him through the kitchen passage, while the third bell sounded, and the academy prepared to obey itself forever. Minister reached the ceremonial hall before us, because institutional authority is apparently most effective when carried by a goat. The service door opened directly behind the visiting delegation. He burst through wearing the rector's ribbon, the completed parchment hanging from his mouth, and a kitchen ladle caught around one horn. Every painted guardian turned toward him. So did 412 students. I entered behind him. Burhanu's face contained an entire lecture. I did not give him time to begin. My name is Aster Desta, I said, and my voice carried strangely beneath the white lamps. I altered the rector's shadow for a joke. I hid evidence from my friends. I entered sealed rooms without permission. I forged a key, tried to repair the central scroll alone, and nearly damaged it because I wanted being clever to excuse being afraid. The official record above my head displayed my student title, Gifted Interpreter of Excellent Promise. My confession contradicted it. The central scroll hesitated. One guardian lowered its staff. Dawit understood first. He looked at the flawless ceremonial script in his hands, then deliberately dragged one gold line a finger's width beyond its border. Burhanu stared at him. You have introduced an error. I have introduced a choice, Dawit said. Hannah stepped beside me. Why does a protection created to serve students refuse to listen to them? The nearest guardian turned toward her. A second-year student raised her hand and admitted she had memorized a vow she did not believe. Another said he wanted to honor his family but not obey them forever. A healing student confessed that she sometimes resented the people she had promised to serve. Each honest statement made the central scroll flicker. The guardians did not vanish. They became uncertain. Berhanu moved toward the activation stand. Order must be restored before the bindings spread. Then answer one question, I said. I used Turanesh's ceremonial form and spoke the unfinished tale. A judge finds a thief stealing bread during a famine. The law demands punishment. Mercy demands release. The baker's children are also hungry. What ending protects justice? The hall waited. Berhanu knew the tale. Every senior scholar did, but modern versions supplied an approved ending. The original did not. There must be a correct interpretation, he said. Give us one. He proposed repayment through labor. A baker's daughter objected that labor could not replace food already lost. He proposed release. A law student asked what would prevent organized theft. He proposed royal relief. Hannah asked what happened before the relief arrived. Every answer created another truthful question. The scroll's white light began softening toward gold. Berhanu looked at the students, teachers, workers, regional scribes, and visiting guests. For the first time, he was not facing disorder. He was facing a community refusing to become simple. Then he unfolded his prepared speech. Minister smelled the bitter green ink. The goat leapt. Berhanu lifted the parchment too late. Minister seized the final sheet and ate the concluding paragraph in 3 bites. The visiting prince laughed first. One student joined him. Then another. Dawit attempted to remain dignified for approximately 2 seconds before covering his mouth and failing. Mother Senate laughed openly. Hannah leaned against a pillar. Even several painted guardians developed visible smiles. Berhanu stood holding half a speech and looking at the goat who had now interrupted 2 royal ceremonies. His shoulders dropped. Then the rector laughed. Not loudly, not happily at first, but freely. The central scroll released the bound vow. The doors opened one handspan. That is not enough, I said. We have to rebuild the margin together. This time I asked. Dawit corrected the broken geometry while preserving his deliberate imperfection. Hannah painted a small goat beside the student vows. Mother Senate restored an unfinished swallow. Regional scribes added variant symbols. Students spoke what their promises meant and what limits mercy, health, family, and freedom required. I wrote living footnotes, only where contradictions needed clarification. Each one made nearby magic take my next words literally, so the process became complicated. When I said we needed space, the hall expanded its shadows and moved every chair 6 feet apart. When I said the work was coming together, loose parchment pieces flew into a single enormous pile on Dawit. When I told him he looked buried, 3 funeral scrolls opened. He emerged holding a gold border strip and said, "Please stop describing things." Together, we completed no single perfect pattern. We created a border of open questions, unfinished creatures, corrections, jokes, regional spellings, and small marks showing where one person's understanding ended and another's began. The painted guardians returned to the walls. The 9 lamps changed from white to their ordinary amber flame. The central scroll released every literal promise and rewrote them as freely offered intentions. Berhanu placed his remaining speech on the floor. I removed what I did not understand, he said. I called that safety. No one applauded. It was not that kind of moment. He turned to me, and you understood more than you admitted. I called that independence. Dawit looked between us. Both terms require revision. Minister ate the corner of the official program. For once, no one stopped him. The academy, did not become sensible after that. It became more honest about how difficult sense was. Burhanu suspended the standardization project the next morning. He remained rector, which surprised the students who preferred consequences to arrive with dramatic robes and public exile. Instead, he accepted a less theatrical punishment: responsibility. He created a review council containing healers, regional scribes, students, craftsmen, caravan wardens, kitchen workers, and ordinary families who actually lived with the protection scholars designed. Dowit's copying method survived. In fact, it improved. His standard forms preserved the central structure, while local readers completed interpretive margins suited to their communities. Reliable protections became cheaper without pretending every household used language the same way. Hannah received a full scholarship for identifying the connection between the bitter ink and the goats. Minister was banned from administrative buildings. Unfortunately, the written order named him former Deputy Rector Aster Desta. Removing the title would have required reopening the academy charter before 9 witnesses, so Burhanu chose to live with it. My consequences were less dignified. I repeated interpretive ethics. I became Mother Senate's junior assistant. And every proposed prank required prior approval. I responded with a 47-page application requesting permission to annotate the approval form, so it would complain whenever it became unnecessarily long. Burhanu returned it with one note: denied, but structurally impressive. Dowit did not forgive me immediately. I was grateful, eventually. Easy forgiveness would have let me treat trust like another door I could open with the correct symbol. Instead, I told him the truth in smaller pieces. I told him when Turanesh's memories frightened me. I admitted when I did not know an answer. I apologized without adding a joke twice in 1 month, which remains my greatest recorded achievement. He began admitting when my jokes were funny, usually by pretending to cough into his sleeve. Several weeks later, I taught 12 nervous first-years how to make their first sleeping room protections. I explained written form, image, breath, and interpretation. I showed them how clear instructions prevented harm and how unfinished patterns reminded magic to pause. Then I painted one tiny smiling goat in the margin. Dowit, inspecting the tables behind me, stopped. Is that academically necessary? I considered lying, but the truth lamp on the shelf had developed opinions about me. History has already answered that question. From outside, Minister bleated. The enchanted classroom door unlocked with visible reluctance. He entered wearing an official blue ribbon nobody admitted giving him, and all 12 students stood because the door announced a former deputy rector. I had spent years believing responsibility was a trap designed to make clever people easier to control. I was wrong. Responsibility was what made cleverness worth trusting. The academy still taught that every spell needed a clear command. I taught the second rule: never trust a command that cannot survive being laughed at.